This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under 18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 537 for November 2nd, 2017. Coming up on today's show, a chat with Ignacio Rivera. That's coming up on today's show. Hello, everyone. We have a jam-packed show for you this week. Not only do we have the fabulous Ignacio Rivera chatting us up about all kinds of issues on this week's show, but we also have some interesting news items. We've got more reviews of the Marston movie. We've got feedback and a happy poly moment as well. So that being said, I'm not going to do very much host chat this week. Instead, we're going to start by paying a few bills with a word from our sponsor.
Are you planning on opening up your relationship? The University of Utah Relationship Decisions Lab is looking for participants in monogamous relationships who are currently considering opening up their relationship to take a survey. We are looking for individuals who have never opened up and individuals who have opened up in the past but are currently with one partner and are planning on opening up again. This study will examine how people choose to open their relationships and what their experiences of this relationship transition look like. If you or anyone you know fits our qualifications, we invite you to take our survey. You can find our survey at www.relationshipdecisions.org. Once there, click on the Participants tab and then on the Open Relationship Project link. Not only will you be furthering science, but you will be entered to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Again, the link is www.relationshipdecisions.org. Click on the Participants tab and the Open Relationship Project link.
Again, that link is relationshipdecisions.org, and please do click through that link, because when you click through that link, that tells our sponsors that not only do people listen to the ads, but they're actually willing to take action based on them. And as the torturer says in The Princess Bride, be honest, remember, it's for science. We have two items in Poly in the News this week. First, a listener sent in a YouTube reviewer's review of the Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman movie. Now, this is not a reviewer that I'm familiar with. He's called Movie Bob, and wow, does he talk fast. Here's just a little clip that is about a minute long, and I think it's all one sentence.
Why, yes, I have gotten all that out of my system. And good thing, too, because this movie actually really good. Okay, so I'm still a little bit surprised that this exists. See, for those of you who don't know, DC Comics and now Warner Brothers spent the better part of the last several decades working really hard to avoid a lot of extended conversation about Wonder Woman creator William Moulton Marston, a Harvard psychology professor and inventor of the lie detector. Some of that, of course, is because of long litigated rights issues with the professor's family and estate, but it's also because, well, you know how public morality crusaders were going after superheroes in the late 40s and early 50s, and writers got dragged in front of committees to testify that no, Batman and Robin aren't supposed to be gay, no, Superman isn't secretly communist propaganda? Well, William Marston could not make that same sort of denial honestly, because Wonder Woman actually was a vehicle through which he sought to explore and impart his then radical theories on human psychology, gender, feminism, sexuality, societal relationships, as expressed through metaphors of bondage, dominance, and submission roleplay, developed in part through collaboration with his wife Elizabeth and their mutual female partner Olive Byrne, with whom they lived in a committed BDSM-practicing three-way romantic relationship.
But it is a good and accurate review of the movie and has over 38,000 views and 1,000 likes. So, hey, I gave it a like and, take a listen. You should too. And by the way, if you're not already convinced you should go see this movie, you should go see this movie. Next up is that Spike Lee is coming out with a new series on Netflix that is supposed to be polyamorous and pansexual. It's called She's Gotta Have It, and apparently it was a movie from 1986. I apparently was busy waiting for The Princess Bride to come out in 1987, but the plot of that movie was Nola Darling, who was a free and independent woman, was juggling 3 male lovers, and they all got jealous, and, she ended up being monogamous and choosing the one she was supposed to, yada, yada, yada. But now, Lee is supposed to be bringing that character of Nola Darling back in a Netflix TV series, debuting on Thanksgiving Day. However, this time she is self-identifying as a sex-positive, polyamorous pansexual, where monogamy never even seemed like a remote possibility. Now, it's not out yet, so we don't really know. She appears to be very confident and sure of herself. This could be a nice solo poly representation, which would be nice because it wouldn't be, oh, here's a heterosexual white couple opening up their relationship to a third person who has to be a hot bi babe. That would be really nice to see a different representation of poly. Or it could just suck. It is a sitcom, so, there's going to be cheap laughs. We don't know yet, but this is something that we should track. And without any further ado, let's get on to our super fun interview with Ignacio Rivera. I'm so excited to have with me in the Poly Weekly studios today, Ignacio Rivera. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I am, getting over cold, as you might be able to hear, but I'm so excited to have you here. This is your first time on the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Well, we've been really remiss. I can't believe we've done 500 episodes and have never had you on, but better late than never. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with your 20 years of work, but for those who aren't, would you care to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ignacio Rivera, and I am a New Yorker currently living in Baltimore. I've been doing lots of different kinds of work for the past 20 years, or actually more than 20 years. Sexual liberation work has been my baby, something that I have really done a lot of intense work with. I am the founder of Poly Patao Productions, which was something that really started when I was looking for a poly community, and I couldn't find one that spoke to me. And so I started doing work around that and organizing around the importance of sexual liberation, and what being poly meant and looked like, or even non-monogamous, what it looked like in my community. I'm the founder and director of the HEAL Project. And the HEAL Project is, its platform is that comprehensive sex education is a tool to ending child sexual abuse. And through that project, I have a talk show with my daughter called Pure Love. And we talk about kind of story share, story tell about how I raised her, our relationship, and how I spoke with her very openly about sex and sexuality and gender and what that kind of looks like. I am also a writer. I dabble in film work, and I'm a performance artist. So I'll kind of leave it. That's kind of an abbreviated version of the things that I've done for the 20 plus years.
I feel like my first question should be, do you ever sleep? It seems like you've just been doing everything. Do you get to sleep?
Yeah, people ask me that all the time. I don't know how I do it, but I do get some sleep, and I'm able to have relationships. And yeah, I don't know. It's getting a little harder, though, as you get older,
Yeah, I find that being an activist and educator a lot of times means that you don't get time to actually have the types of relationships that you teach other people to have. Well, there was so much in your introduction I want to ask you about. Let's start with the HEAL Project. Tell us more about that. You've been doing that for quite a while.
Yes, it's been going on 2 years now that I've been working on that. And it is a project that was made possible by the Just Beginnings Collaborative. They put out a call to organizations and to individuals to propose projects that were going to have some different kinds of thinking around how to address and ultimately end child sexual abuse. So the individuals that applied were specific to survivors of color, and then there were organizations working on ending child sexual abuse. Through that, I was able to get the Heal Project off the ground, and it is basically a lot of workshops, speaking engagements. I'm going to be hopefully creating a toolkit for parents on how to talk with their young people in their lives, or aunts, uncles, grandparents, whoever the adult is, on talking openly, honestly, and removing the shame from sex with young people. So that's like the major thing. I've had some campaigns that have been out there, like Sex Ed is one of the campaigns, and Outing CSA is another one where people are just coming out as CSA survivors.
What is the Sex Ed is campaign? Tell us about that.
Sex Ed is a video campaign where I ask different people 3 questions. If they're a parent, they get a 4th kind of a prompt. And so the questions are, can you pinpoint the first time you learned about sex? The second question is, what impact did learning or not learning about sex have on you? And the third question is, what is comprehensive sex education to you? What does that mean to you? And if they're a parent, they would finish this kind of prompt. As a parent, I will, I fear. And, unfortunately, a lot of the folks that did that Sex Ed is campaign, they say that the first time they learned about sex was unfortunately their sexual abuse. So I interviewed survivors, but also sex educators who were not survivors, but sex educators talking about the importance of this comprehensive sex education and what that means. So really like broadening the scope of what it means to talk about sex, that it goes beyond, procreation and heterosexual sex and just this normalcy, right?
You have an online show with your daughter that you're doing. Is that part of the Heal Project, or is that a separate project?
Yes, it was born through the Heal Project, because one of the things I'm doing is trying to connect with parents or adults connected to young people to ask, how do you talk with your children or young people? Like, how have you done it? What have you said and what have you omitted and why? And really talking about like sex education as a life skill. That if we don't teach that, it's detrimental, And so, and people asking me a lot of questions. People were asking me like, how do you do it? Like, how do you just talk to your kid? And when I first thought about this toolkit, I thought about more of a curriculum base, and that quickly changed because the demographic of people that I really want to connect with, I want to connect in a way that I'm not going to bore people. I don't want to speak in academic speak. I want to be able to talk to all different kinds of folks and make it as easy as possible and not make it so hard for a subject that's really difficult. And one way was to just start showing people how I was doing it with my daughter. And it's kind of, multi-pronged. It's not just about talking about sex education. It's also about relationship building with the young people in our lives, whether that's your child or your nephew or your grandchild. We distance ourselves from young people, and it becomes really difficult to have the talks, not just the one that we're so accustomed to doing, if we have it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, my parents, there were no talks. There was absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I'm still waiting.
I think that was not uncommon in my parents' day and age. Although my mother did give me a book published sometime in the 50s called Conversations with Jane that you may be familiar with.
Oh, yes.
Completely useless and very silly. And I kept trying to figure out what the hell a wolf was. I'm literal. I'm like, is that literally a wolf? That is, I did not know. And the program you're doing with your daughter is called Pure Love. Is that right?
Yes.
And where can we find that? It's a video program, right?
Yes. You can either find it on YouTube under Pure Love Talks, or my website, which is igrivera.com. And all of the projects that I have is like a hub in that website. And
how old is your daughter?
She's 27.
Okay. So looking back at the past about how you communicated with her over sex about
Yes. Yes. And other things too. Like, I'm trying to really talk about it in terms of, it's not just the scary thing, right? Like sex, we have to talk about the penis and vagina, it's so scary. And if I talk to my kids, they're going to go run out and do it. But it really is about all the things that surround it, right? Because if you really think about it, we're teaching our children how to communicate appropriately with other people and young people, how to have friendships, really good friendships, how to negotiate what they want, how to create boundaries for their bodies or for,
Exactly.
so that's all sex education. I mean, it's all incorporated into that. So the conversations or the shows that I've had with my daughter, we're talking about, body image, mental health, teen pregnancy, me coming out as a survivor, all of those things.
Yeah, there's so much that's not about sex
Yeah.
that is included in that type of conversation about, as you say, setting your own boundaries, asking for what you want, saying no, being able to hear no. And there are all those things that people just go straight to the sex.
Yeah. and so and fumble through it a lot of times because they're terrified.
Yeah.
And what I keep learning is that one of the major reasons that parents don't talk to, two major reasons they don't talk to their children about sex, is one, they really don't know. And two, they're terrified that if they give this information that they'll run out and do it.
Because of course, no red-blooded human being would ever have sex because if your parents never talked to you about it.
Right.
Well, I could say that my parents never talked to me about sex, and yet I have managed to have sex, oddly enough. Just throwing that out there. There's so many things I want to ask you. I'm going to do an awkward gear shift here.
Mm-hmm.
So, because the show is called Polyamory Weekly, I should probably ask you if you're polyamorous, which I believe you are.
Yes.
And what that looks like now and how you first came to discover polyamory.
Yes, so I have been polyamorous for 20 years, and I feel like I came out as poly in my community at a time where, people were like, what the hell is that? and also, oh, that's that white thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in a monogamous relationship, and the funny thing about it is that I had never even considered polyamory because I didn't know it was a choice. I actually just didn't know about it. So I was in monogamous relationships and very committed in them, always feeling like something was up. And I often talked about how even though I loved this particular person, it didn't stop me from desiring other people. So I was really aware of my desires that continued. So I was in a relationship, sexually, I was not getting what I wanted from my partner. We discussed it and tried to figure it out. And her suggestion was, let's bring a third in. And we tried to find one. We couldn't find one because we both wanted different things. And so they gave me the go ahead to, since I traveled a lot with work, they were like, well, while you're away traveling, you do what you want to do. I don't want to know about it. Uh-huh. And,
how did that work out for you?
I didn't do it. It took me about 5 months to actually even do it because I was fighting against it. I was like, I just want to do that sex thing with you, not with anyone else. And she was like, well, I can't give you the thing that you want. So this is how it's got to be. And so I waited, I fought against it, and I ended up going to this event. This was back in my lesbian days, and I went to a lesbian getaway, and I had sex with 2 women on that trip, and I felt so fucking liberated. I felt fantastic, and I felt a deeper sense of love for my partner. I came back home and our relationship was feeling a lot better for a little while. And for other reasons, we ended up breaking up. But after that breakup, that door was opened and there was no way I was ever going back. So I was like, I can do this. I love my partner and I had, relations with other people. I want to explore this a little more. So I did. I stood, unattached for 2 years and had a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun. And then later on, it took a primary partner.
If this was 20 years ago, how did you find poly people? How did you find your poly community?
Oh, because I'm super creative.
Internet.
I know, right? I'm super creative. So there was nothing. I couldn't find. Well, there was the Gay and Lesbian Center, and there was a poly group there, but the poly group was mostly men and all white.
Oh.
So I was like the only person of color, and so I was like, well, I could learn some things here, but this is not my community. I don't feel like I'm here. So I started just talking to people. I started outing myself as polyamorous. Every time I met someone at a bar or anything, I would say it, and that was a conversation piece. They would be like, what the hell is that? Or, I start telling them more information about it. And a lot of people were intrigued by it. Other people were like, yeah, I do that. I don't call it poly. I do it this way. So I did my own little social experiment, which was really good. And then I decided to start a poly group. So I started Shades of Poly, a poly and non-monogamous support group type thing for people of color who were interested in just talking about it, exploring it, or people who identified as that. And that was really great. And through that group, I met a lot of people. And that's how my world kind of expanded. And I just started doing workshops around it. And so I met other people from other cities, and that's how it's funny because the people, and looking back, the people that I had relationships with in my poly, relationships, I met them and they did not identify as poly when I met them. They identified as poly when we started dating because they believed in it. They were like, oh my God, that is awesome. I never had a word for it. This makes sense to me.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And that's actually a segue, speaking of poly events. So we were both at Poly Dallas Millennium. I'm sure you have been to a million events on the topic of polyamory. But what did you learn at Poly Dallas Millennium that you didn't know before? Did you get any new information there?
What did I learn new?
Or it may take the form of meeting new people or finding a new.
Well, that's what I always
project.
Yeah, that's what I always get from going to the events. It's like meeting new people, connecting with other folks, and also connecting with other people of color who identify as poly is really important to me to expand that community. So Poly Dallas was definitely a space where I was able to see that community. It was a good mix of folks there.
Yeah, it really was. And I know that you've been an activist in the community for a very long time, 20 years. I shouldn't say very long, probably makes you feel old. So what kind of changes have you seen in terms of the poly community over the last 20 years? Clearly more people know the word polyamory now than 20 years ago.
Yes.
But what else?
Yes, more people know about it. I've actually met some people who were young people whose first relationships have been in poly relationships, that they've never been monogamous. So I was like, wow.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It amazed me when I met several people like that. I was like, yeah, I've never had a monogamous relationship. I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
Dude, that's awesome.
And people definitely, people are talking about it in a, much broader political context in terms of how society sees us and how that translates into, policies or laws, or even shaming enough that police are called and child services are, contacted if they feel that, a child is in a household that is, unfit or so. So the visibility is great, but with visibility also comes, people, surveillancing, what that lifestyle is, if it is in fact deviant. But you also see shows that are, reference it. And someone was mentioning it was you on your podcast, I think. It was the yogurt thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I got that from Alan's Poly the News, that there was a yogurt ad that was depicting poly people.
Right. So that's very interesting.
They're using us to sell things.
So yeah, I think a lot more people have more language around that, and some people understand that they have choices, that they can choose monogamy or choose polyamory, and a lot of people shift back and forth from it, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, agreed. You mentioned that when you first discovered a poly meetup, it was an LGBTQ group, but there weren't any people of color, so you didn't feel like it was your community.
Yes.
And I've been wondering, I mean, it's pretty clear that I really hate Cheeto-faced McTwitter thumbs with a fiery passion and think that, pretty much everything that person does is just absolutely awful. But I've noticed that in the poly community, since that guy was elected, there has been a much stronger and more intense drive for diversity. Then there's a sense of urgency about it in the poly community now. So I'm wondering if you have noticed that same thing, that since we elected a giant racist, have you seen a stronger sense of urgency in the poly community to kind of get off our, well, dare I say, our lazy white asses and make sure that our community is really, truly diverse?
I think you said it right? Because I think a lot of people of color have been doing that work and really pushing for the importance of that work. And when I think about it, it's less about diversity and it's more about coexisting, like really representing the reality of our world, and that it isn't totally white, that there are different people, and that sometimes people do things a little differently, and that's okay, that it doesn't have to be a cult, right? So I do believe that people are, fear is kind of kicking them in the butt, and they're working to do that. It's like a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's a blessing that the work is being done, but it's being done out of fear and as a knee-jerk reaction to something, horrible, this, president.
Yeah.
And also, I just want to keep acknowledging, like, there have been folks, people of color, poor folks, people that are not recognized, that have done this work in their communities and push up against groups and organizations that are mainstream that don't acknowledge. And so, like I said, blessing and curse, the work is being done, but it would be nice if the focus of that work was not through fear, but because it was exactly what needed to be done.
By the way, if you know or are one of those people who have been doing this work quietly without recognition, if you want to nominate someone to come on the podcast and talk about that work, please do. polyweekly@gmail.com. Get that little pitch in there. So we're almost at the end of our time together, and there's so much more work that you were doing. One thing I did want to ask you about that I haven't had a chance to yet is your renewed sexuality coaching. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, it is something new that I'm doing. People have been asking me to do it for the longest time, and I just launched it. And it is like sex coaching, sex and relationship coaching, but very much geared towards, it's open to everyone, but it's very much geared towards LGBT, POC, survivors of child sexual abuse or sexual assault. So it's basically folks who are really trying to get back to or start their sexual life, their sexual journey.
Is this one-on-one coaching, group coaching, workshops? What does
that look like? It's all of the above, but mostly one-on-one. But I've also been doing for the past 6 or 7 years a workshop called Sexy Survivor, and that's been really a big hit. Unfortunately, every time I do this workshop, the room is packed, and it is a workshop for survivors of sexual violence to find or to be in the space with other folks and to skill share and to not have shame and to find their sexual lives in spite of the trauma that they've experienced.
I just want to say thank you for doing that work. It's out of reach for a lot of people who either aren't socialized to go to therapy or who feel like there's something wrong with them. And just thank you for doing that work.
Yeah. I think that when we talk about the the sexual liberation movement that, includes, the poly communities and stuff, we have to be careful never to forget, we can't have a sexual liberation movement without talking about child sexual abuse or sexual assault or rape culture. And we can't have a sexual liberation movement if the people most harmed by that violence are not leading or in it and talking.
Absolutely. Clearly, there's so much more to say, but we're pretty close to the end of our time together. I'm sure that everybody listening is going to want to find out more about you and your work. So tell us again where we can find you and your projects.
Yes. My hub of a website is igrivera.com. So my renewed sexuality coaching is there. The Heal Project, Pure Love. And my blog, What They Said, is on there.
Ignacio, thank you so much for joining us today. I know your schedule is incredibly busy, if I didn't already know that. Just hearing all the work that you're doing, I know it now. Thanks again for taking the time to meet with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And thanks again to Ignacio for talking over so many topics with us. And yes, as soon as Ignacio has more time, we will be bringing them back because there's so many things we didn't get to talk about. Our feedback this week is from Kim in Liverpool, who said, I just finished, literally, listening to episode 531 and just had to write in to thank both you and your guest, Iris Muscarella, for raising something I hadn't realized I'd been struggling with. Milestones of the non-relationship escalator kind. Fluid bonding, saying I love you, perhaps even being willing to move someone up in your priorities list. Up until a certain point, perhaps someone you're dating may become more important than an alternative commitment and therefore will have earned more priority from you. These are all milestones that could definitely be considered commitment milestones if moving in together, opening a joint bank account, or getting married aren't suitable. On another note, I was incredibly inspired by Iris. I know, isn't she just absolutely amazing? She came across as such a strong and determined woman, and when she said she runs 2 businesses in addition to other serious commitments, I was awestruck. I know, me too. I found it such an inspiration to hear from a woman who has clearly worked extremely hard on herself, on her career, and on her lifestyle, and appears to be reaping the benefits from her hard work. Go you, Iris. I second that heartily. Kim continues, thank you for continuing to put so much time and energy into the podcast Minx. I've only been listening for a year or so. However, I found that it's not only a great resource, you, your co-hosts, and your guests are so good at raising thought-provoking questions. We should all be trying to better ourselves and the way we do things, and if somebody along the way provokes some thought and self-reflection, then so much the better. Well, thank you, Kim. I agree. I think that life is boring if you don't constantly challenge yourself and your views. Now, I know that's also a bit tiring, but every new person you meet, every new situation you're in is an opportunity to learn something new and to better yourself. Now, that being said, there are definitely some times when I've said, you know what, universe, I have plenty of character. I don't need any more character building today. But in general, I do think it is wonderful to meet different kinds of people who challenge our beliefs. And sometimes we come up with a new perspective. Sometimes we may not change our perspective, but we understand our own perspective better in understanding someone else's. So I'm right there with you. It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by Fubbly Polyamorists everywhere. Jay writes in with a first happy poly moment, saying, I'm relatively new to poly. I've been non-monogamous for almost 2 years and decided about a year to switch from saying I'm exploring polyamory to I am polyamorous. For this reason, I'm still struggling to work through my shit on some basic non-monogamous poly concepts. My boyfriend C and I have been a couple for a little over a year. He is absolutely phenomenal, and I've bonded with him at a level I didn't think existed. While I can't speak for him and how he feels, I know that we fell for each other very quickly, which was difficult for his wife, G, to process. For the duration of our relationship, I've been struggling with feeling like the other, lesser woman and with being scared that G didn't really want me around. She and I were always very nice to each other. When we'd talk, we'd enjoy each other's company, but there always felt like a disconnect. I think we were both keeping our guard up. Recently, C and G had a sexual experience with someone new, and it was the first new sexual partner C has had since we got together. My emotions started running high, but even while I was crying and struggling to process my demons, I would continue to assure him that it was my shit to deal with, that he was not hurting me, it was my inner demons hurting myself, and that he needed to live his life in whatever way brought him joy. I also reached out to G to tell her that I supported them doing anything that brought them joy, and that I would work through my shit. I felt this important since she was there when I was first told and had my large emotional response. That was a very smart move, by the way, Jay. Checking in. Good. Not long after this experience, the three of us went out for drinks, and it was the first time I've ever hung out with them when I felt like I could let my guard down, and it seemed like her guard was down too. We had lovely, candid conversation between the three of us, and it was the first time for me that I genuinely felt like part of the family. They've told me I am before, but this was the first time I felt it. She raised a toast, mentioning how impressed she was by my integrity and called me the best metamour ever. I just about started crying as I toasted about how grateful I was to be part of their family. I truly feel like this is a turning point for our group. Not that it was bad before, but I think the trust has been built. We're all looking out for each other, and we're all willing to do the emotional labor to make this work while simultaneously encouraging autonomy. I'm ridiculously excited about what's in store for us in the future, and while I'm still not through all my emotional struggles, I'm so glad for what this experience has done for our group. I think I'm really excited for you too. And I think you make a really good point that it takes a while to build up trust. Not everyone just jumps in and trusts everyone right away. I'm a slow burn. It takes me at least a couple of months, and that's if all signs are go and everything is ideal. And most situations aren't ideal. There's always something. We've all got baggage. Shit happens. So good for you for recognizing that it took a while to build the trust, and for owning your shit along the way, and for reaching out and communicating, it's not you, it's me, I'm working on it. And then getting the reward of that trust and that sense of family. That is fan-freaking-tabulous. Well, I want to thank everyone for their contributions this week. Thank you all for writing in. Thanks, Ignacio, for joining us. I really appreciate everything that you as an audience do to make this a great podcast. And if you haven't already, why not review us on Apple Podcasts, previously iTunes? That helps with our discoverability. The more reviews we have, well, at least the more 5-star reviews we have, the easier it is for people to discover us when they're looking for a podcast about polyamory or non-monogamy or even just relationships. We are a free resource. We've helped hundreds of thousands of people navigate their introduction to and continued success with polyamory. And your donations, financial if you have them, help keep the podcast free for everyone both inside and outside the community. You can donate at polyweekly.com. Just click the donate. You have to scroll down to the bottom because we put the important information, the free stuff that helps you first, and you have to scroll down to the bottom to find out how you can donate. But if you do that, you can subscribe at $1.99, $4.99, or $9.99 a month by becoming a Polyweekly Playmate. Now, it doesn't get you any extras or bonuses like it should, but it does get you my undying gratitude. You can also give us questions, comments, or feedback, or call in your happy poly moment at 802-505-POLY, or by emailing polyweekly@gmail.com, or you can always find all the latest updates at facebook.com/polyweekly, or at polyweekly, or at cunningminx on Twitter. I think that about wraps it up for today's show, so I'm going to say once again, thank you for listening, and remember, it's not all about the sex.